Welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I am Don Cairns, a past president of the City Club Forum Foundation. I'm very pleased today to introduce our speaker, Karen Gahl-Mills. A graduate of Westlake High School, Karen was appointed in November of '09 to a 4-year term as Executive Director of Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Beginning in 1998, leaders from arts and cultural organizations, foundations, local governments, and other private entities cooperated to create an arts and culture plan for the region, which called for public funding to strategically support the local arts and culture sector. It is a defining element of our regional, national, and worldwide image, a key facet of our economy, and an important resource for educating our children. Voters in the county recognized this when we approved a 10-year cigarette tax to fund the Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. That levy was passed in November of '06. Karen has demonstrated great ability to relate to both the volunteer leadership and performers in various arts organizations. As a vocalist and cellist, there was no better option. Karen has been widely recognized for her innovative perspective on the role that arts institutions can play in building vibrant communities. Outside of her artistic talent, she is also a proven communicator and strategic planner and has built a fine reputation for the combination of leadership, artistic vision, and financial responsibility. Karen holds a Bachelor of Music degree from Chicago's DePaul University and an MBA from the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. She launched her career in arts management in 1990 in Los Angeles, where she worked for an award-winning cinematographer as part of a team creating national and international advertising for Philip Morris, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, General Motors, and other global brands. I find it a little amusing that after 20 years, you still have an interest in cigarette sales. Her work soon led her to Chicago and back to her roots as a musician, first as a development officer for the celebrated Ravinia Festival, the summer home of the Chicago Symphony, and then as managing director of the Rhythm Cafe, an award-winning advertising music production company. Prior to her arrival in Syracuse in 2006, Karen was the executive director of the Westchester Philharmonic in suburban New York City. Most recently, she served as president and executive director of the Syracuse Symphony Orchestra. With a mission to sustain the excellence of Cuyahoga County's arts and cultural assets, Cuyahoga Arts and Culture has to date awarded grants worth a combined total of more than $65 million to 150 Cuyahoga County organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, please extend a warm City Club welcome to Karen Gahl-Mills.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Don, for that nice introduction, and thank you all for taking a moment out of your day to come here today and hear me speak. I should also take a moment to recognize a couple of folks in the audience here. We have a couple of members of Cuyahoga Arts and Culture's Board of Directors here, including Steve Minter, our chair at the head table, and Sari Feldman, who's also a member of our board. Also at the head table, I should thank my friend and colleague Tom Schorgel from the Community Partnership for Arts and Culture, and many of his team are here as well. And our staff team is also here, primarily sitting toward the back there. They actually do the work that I'm about to describe, so it's important to recognize that this is very much a team effort. I should also take a minute and recognize my parents who are here, Dick and Judy Gahl. They instilled a love of music and nature and art in both my brother and me, and when our family moved to Westlake in 1981, they frequently took us to the region's great museums and parks and other cultural assets. They taught me to expect that a great community is filled with great culture, and I'm happy to be back in Cleveland, working every day to help the arts community that was such an important part of my upbringing, so thanks, Mom and Dad. And finally, as I look here at Dolly and Steve Minter, who have been partners for some 50 years, I am reminded of the importance of that person in our lives who is there at the beginning and the end of each day, who celebrates our triumphs with us and endures our disappointments, all the while keeping us from getting big heads. For me, that's my husband, Larry Mills Gahl, who's sitting with my parents. Thanks, Larry. So, when you come to a talk like this, you probably have some expectation about the content. I believe this was billed as State of Our Arts. State of the blank suggests something, we'll say something inspiring about the topic at hand, and then provide some evidence about those inspiring statements, hopefully true, and then talk about what comes next. And frankly, I have fretted quite a bit about how to make that first statement. The state of our arts is. The answer is not so simple. At least if we want to have the honest dialogue that I know you have come to expect from the City Club. But we have a very good story to tell precisely because of the amount of dedicated public support for the arts that our community enjoys. So we will begin to answer the question by talking about what Cuyahoga Arts and Culture does and how we do it. Then we'll talk about some of the real impact that CAC's funding has had on our landscape since our first grants were made. And with that information in hand, we'll return to the state of our arts, talk about what we mean by culture, and talk about how we can work together to help our community build ownership of the rich and diverse cultural assets that we've come to enjoy. So let me start with a little CAC 101. And I look around the room, I see so many familiar faces from organizations that receive CAC funding. I will only hit highlights because most of you know some of this story. I'd encourage you all to visit our website, cacgrants.org, for more. And we have a report to the community for 2010 that will be released shortly that will have a lot more detail as well. You heard in the introduction about the long campaign for public funding that culminated in November of 2006 with our 10-year tax on cigarettes. In 2011, we will fund grants of nearly $15 million to nonprofit arts organizations from all arts disciplines, and we include nature and science as arts disciplines as well. Annual grant awards range from $1.6 million for some of the largest organizations to less than $1,000 for a community-based project taking place in the city of Bedford. And you should know that we keep our administrative cost to less than 5% of our total expenses this year. It is important that the tax money that's generated is invested in all of you and not in our agency. We make our grants through two primary grant programs: General Operating Support, which is our deep program for arts and cultural institutions of all sizes. We think it's very important to have a healthy arts ecosystem. You need small organizations and grassroots organizations and everything up to Playhouse Square and the Cleveland Orchestra. And then we have a project support program that's the way that we get at arts activity that's happening in places other than traditional arts organizations. We also support special initiatives in the community, including the Creative Workforce Fellowship, which is an individual artist fellowship program managed by our friends at CPAC. It is one of few in the country, and I think it is one of the real shining lights of our arts scene here. At CAC, we value accountability, impartiality, and transparency, and those values are reflected in our grant-making process. Everybody fills out an application. This is not about who you know. This is about fairness and making sure everyone's held to the same standard. Grant awards are determined by panels of experts who come to Cleveland from all around the country and evaluate applications based on a set of key criteria. The funding itself is actually provided primarily by formula, so that large organizations may receive large dollars, but small organizations receive a larger percentage of their budget, again, ensuring impartiality and fairness. There are 6 of us on staff. Our board is just 5, appointed by our county executive. And just so that you're aware, we are a political subdivision of the state, which means we are not a 501c3, and we are separate from city or county government. One of the bedrock principles at CAC is the importance of the use of public funds for public benefit. Yes, the funds that we manage are designated for organizations that provide arts and cultural heritage. But we manage those funds not for the benefit of the organizations themselves, but for the benefit of the residents of our community. Our constituents extend beyond the audiences for arts activities out to the public at large. Residents of Bay Village and North Royalton and Strongsville and Solon and Richmond Heights and Garfield Heights and Cleveland Heights and East Cleveland, and well, I think you get the idea. By recognizing our constituency more broadly, we set the stage for shifting the emphasis in our grant-making programs as well. That work is underway as we make revisions to our grant program guidelines, beginning with the guidelines for project support for 2012. And knowing that the community at large is a key stakeholder in our work, we continue to make our decisions and debate our issues in public and with high levels of transparency. Our board meetings are open to the public, commercial. The next one is Monday, April 4th at 4 o'clock at IdeaStream. I hope you'll consider joining us for that or a future meeting for what will likely be lively discussion. But CAC 101 is not the story that I want to tell here today. I am proud of the work that we and everyone on the staff does, but we are merely the stewards of this important resource. Let's turn our attention now to the way that this resource is benefiting the community. I hope that I can impress upon you how extraordinary our funding is. Dedicated public support for the arts is not a new phenomenon. The first such district was established in St. Louis in 1971, but it is still relatively rare to find a community that can come together as we did and vote for significant and dedicated public arts support. Beyond the type of funding mechanism we enjoy, however, the amount of funding that we benefit from here is uncommonly large. You'll recall that our grants will total almost $15 million this year. Over the life of the tax, we will likely generate more than $100 million that will be granted to organizations. There's dedicated support right next door in Pittsburgh, thanks to a dedicated sales tax. They did $8 million last year. There's dedicated support in San Francisco, thanks to their terrific hotel-motel tax. It's one of the oldest programs in the country. I think it was $12 million last year. We are one of the largest local public funders in the country, by far the largest public funder in Ohio, far outpacing our friends at the Ohio Arts Council. I tell you all of this for two reasons. First, to build some civic pride for the accomplishment. In 2006, this community did something amazing by creating a wonderful resource to help support the cultural activities that we all care about. Hooray! There we go. Thank you. But more importantly, I want you to think with me about the responsibility that we now have to use this resource in an equally extraordinary manner. Good stewardship of a resource of this size requires that we think boldly and work to use these dollars not only to provide sustaining support for organizations, but also for the benefit of the community and in support of a new future for Cleveland and the region. And while creating the resource is an accomplishment in its own right, we must never forget what public money is for: public benefit. Without question, the money has made a difference for the organizations that we fund. Upon my arrival, I made it a priority to meet with all of the organizations that receive grants from us, and I heard story after story about the importance of public dollars in supporting the public programming that organizations produce. CAC's money has been vitally important, particularly the general operating support dollars that are hard to come by from other sources. But let's ask a different question, one that I think is fundamental to CAC's reason for being. Has the presence of dedicated public support for the arts made a difference for the residents of our community? I'm pleased to be able to answer this question with a resounding yes. Thanks to a new tool, the Ohio Cultural Data Project, and some very difficult data entry work by all of the organizations that we fund, sorry, we have a better way to measure the impact of CAC's funding over time. We can take a before and after picture and look at how folks fared in 2007 before we made grants and how they fared in 2009 after our funding had come online. And I should pause here to thank our friends at CPAC. One of their key competencies is around research, and Megan and Kristen and Tom helped us take this data and turn it into something that we could use and talk about with you today. So, working with a set of 61 organizations, and bear in mind that is not the entire arts and cultural sector, that is 61 organizations who receive general operating support, we can say the following. Geographic impact. We can now confidently say that programs funded in part with these dedicated tax dollars reach each of the 59 communities that comprise Cuyahoga County. More interesting than the geography, however, is the increase in access to arts and cultural programs and activities since we came online. First, The number of cultural activities available to the public has increased by 25% since 2007. And we all know what the economy has looked like since 2007, right? And it's not just activities themselves that have increased. Attendance, both paid and free, is up 7% from 2007. So not only is there more stuff available for county residents to do in University Circle and throughout the county, more people are attending that stuff. That's exactly the outcome we want from the addition of significant public funding into the marketplace, and that's a hooray again. Beyond increased programming and increased attendance, let's turn now to two important issues for our community: jobs and education. Again, looking at our 61 organizations, they employ nearly 2,200 full and part-time workers and another 3,000 individuals as contract workers. So these 61 organizations are responsible for 5,000 primarily skilled jobs. Interestingly, that number has stayed relatively steady over the past 3 years, and those are local jobs. Folks who live and work here, pay their property taxes and their sales taxes, send their kids to school, and invest in our communities. Now, you may be wondering, 5,000 jobs, well, is that a big number or a little number? Compare it to this. According to the Ohio Department of Development's 2010 Major Employers Report, Eaton Corporation, venerable here, has 3,000 jobs in the region. Parker Hannifin, 3,400. Goodrich, yesterday's paper, 400 jobs here, plus we're looking to add another 600. If you don't think that the arts and cultural sector is a key community development partner in the region, think again. Turning our attention to education, another important quality of life issue, again, the news is strong. 35% increases in classes and/or workshops offered by that same set of organizations. And with that increased programming, they experienced 1 million visits by school children to their organizations. Plus, we also tracked an 8% decrease in tuition for the workshops and classes, continuing the trend of making them more accessible to the public. And the educational activities in this sector are not just happening through field trips to downtown locations. In 2009, 826 off-site programs were offered by these institutions, which means that they took programming from downtown to a library or a school or wherever it happened to be. And this is over 100% increase since 2007. Now, those of you in the room who are arts administrators know part of this is schools don't have money for buses anymore, right? But I think it's still important that we are connecting with communities in the way that we're going to them as well as asking them to come to us. So let's sum this up. More programming in more locations, attended by more people. Clearly, investing public dollars in organizations dedicated to arts and cultural heritage has already provided a significant dividend to the residents of Cuyahoga County, and we have yet to reach the midway point of our funding. The quantitative data, however, is much less interesting than the stories. Stories of important ways that organizations who receive CAC funding connect with our community. And an aside, whenever someone like me tells a story about an organization, there's always a concern, well, why didn't she mention mine? So know that I love you all, and I'm going to just call out a couple of these things here. For example, funds from CAC allow the Botanical Gardens to expand its Green Corps and bring community gardens and job training to city neighborhoods every summer. Funds from CAC help support Cleveland Public Theater's Y Haven program, a place where homeless men are able to express themselves through theater and reclaim their dignity. The funds that we invest in the Beck Center in Lakewood allow it to offer a wide variety of arts classes to students of all ages and abilities. The funds that we invest at Karamu House allow them to provide arts-infused early education to kids from ages 0 to 5, so that when they get to school, they can call upon the thinking skills they learned through the arts to help them succeed. The funds that we invest in Playhouse Square and IdeaStream are then reinvested in important community engagement activities, such as professional development workshops for teachers, and through the Progressive Arts Alliance, a hip-hop camp for kids. And the distance learning project that we fund at the Jennings Center for Older Adults allows those with limited mobility to still experience the masterpieces at the Cleveland Museum of Art without having to travel there. Clearly, I could go on forever about this stuff, but the point is that CAC's funds help to support the things that make our community strong, and I hope that you are proud, as I am, of how these funds are being used. Now, let's return to the title of this talk, The State of Our Arts. I said at the outset that to really address the issue, we needed to explore CAC's work and the role of public funding in our culture, and clearly we have good news to share about the impact of public funding in this community. Public money has kept the arts as an inseparable part of our local culture, and that's a good thing. But public funding is only a piece of the state of our arts. Our arts includes a wide variety of institutions, both for-profit and non-profit, both amateur and professional. It includes a growing community of artists drawn to our region by reasonable rents and the chance to join a growing arts community that has a national reputation. It also includes neighborhood improvement groups that work to beautify our streets and add colorful murals to the landscape. It includes developers who work with our urban designers to reimagine the flats and public square, complete with green spaces and meaningful public art. It includes our network of CDCs who work to build nodes of activity that benefit area residents. It includes service organizations such as CPAC and COSY, and it includes those economic development organizations that work to attract businesses and tourists to our community by demonstrating the great quality of life that we all enjoy here. In short, our arts doesn't simply mean highfalutin high art. Here in Northeast Ohio, our arts means our community's culture, something of which we are fiercely proud, something that we all own, and something that we will fight to defend. Using that definition, then, it's clear that the state of our arts is strong. We must not be complacent, however. To remain strong, all of us must work with a community orientation every day. We can still create high-quality art and focus on the community. That is not a trade-off that we must make. But to really build an authentic relationship with the community, to really be an inseparable part of the culture, requires humility, good listening skills, and the willingness to change. If we are ever going to overcome the perception that the arts are extra, we must take this community work to heart and begin to think differently about how we interact with our neighbors. Nor must we make light of the other challenges that our community faces. Artists and arts organizations have struggled with the same troubles that exist in the economy as a whole: a shifting, shrinking population, lack of access to credit, lack of working capital and reserves, losses to endowments. All of these continue to challenge arts organizations of all sizes in our community. At the same time, many organizations are coming to grips with a changed landscape as our residents redefine the ways that they want to relate to arts organizations, not simply as members, but as real participants. The internal culture change that will be needed as organizations find their way in unfamiliar territory may be a barrier to building organizational resilience. As the stewards of a public resource, we at CAC do worry about the financial health of the sector, as well as the financial health of the organizations that we fund. If organizations don't have the capacity to continue to present their programming because chronic or structural deficits have exhausted their resources, we must think carefully about making additional public investments in those organizations. Those are challenging conversations to have, but we feel at CAC that it is our obligation on behalf of the public to monitor financial health carefully and keep in close contact with organizations and help them navigate these difficult waters. In the midst of these significant challenges, however, here's a bit of positive news. In 2009, going back to our set of 61 organizations, that group raised over $160 million in support of their work, on par with the amount of money they raised in 2007. And that's $160 million apart from us, apart from endowment campaigns, apart from special campaigns and bridge campaigns and capital campaigns. That's support from the community. Even though organizations face these financial challenges, it's clear that the community still believes in them and in their power to improve our quality of life. Public money, combined with public investment from corporations, from foundations, and from individuals, can and will make the difference in seeing that the culture of our region continues to include rich and diverse experiences that appeal to all of our residents. Public money alone, or private money alone, would not be able to say the same thing. So let's wind up this talk with a look into the future, both for CAC and for all of us. Based on what you've heard here today, I hope that you agree that given the size of the resource that we have to invest, CAC has an important role to play in ensuring both that we continue to use public dollars to increase the public's benefit and to help build the resilience of the organizations that we fund. Investing in increased public benefit means a couple of practical things for our agency. We continue to evolve our grant programs to place more emphasis in the area of community benefit. For me, community benefit means building and nurturing meaningful relationships between artists, institutions, and neighborhoods. It's time-consuming, inefficient work, and yet it is critically important to building community ownership of the arts assets that are so important to our local economy. It's about building culture, as we defined it earlier, the culture of a neighborhood defined by safe streets, strong schools, and engaged residents. We will challenge all organizations that receive CAC funding to consider how their work will provide greater and greater benefits to the culture of Cuyahoga County, and we will help them begin to really think this through. CAC will also explore ways to increase its support of community-based work. At our board meeting on April 4th, again, 4 o'clock, Idea Stream, please join us. Staff will recommend that the board approve a pilot grant program for 2012 that will provide an avenue for smaller organizations to receive smaller grants with a simpler application requirement. This is in addition to our existing project support program. We will also continue to explore a neighborhood-based grant-making strategy, looking at models in other cities and at the success of neighborhood connections right here in Cleveland. And we will begin an exploration in earnest of ways that we can support arts learning at all levels, seeking to find ways that public money can add value to the important work that's already being done at the community level throughout our region. We're also going to begin to tackle this idea of building resilience into the sector, both by helping to strengthen organizations and through creating some mechanisms for supporting innovation and risk-taking. Again, all in service to our community. To do this well, we will need to listen carefully to the needs of our organizations and our community, and we will need to explore ways to support organizations through alternate means, such as shared services and support for strategic collaboration. For this work, we will need partners. Collectively, the grant makers in this community can make a bigger difference in this important area than any one of us can alone. And using building resilience as an agenda for strengthening the public-private partnership that supports community issues can only benefit all of us. So that's what we're going to do. But we need your help. Our arts, our culture, if that is to remain strong, we must all get involved. Our culture isn't extra to who we are, it helps define who we are. So talk about it. Talk about Cleveland's culture and what it means to you. Help others understand why we have all chosen to live here. Follow our work, certainly, but get involved. Get involved with our arts however you can, as a ticket buyer, as a volunteer, as a donor, as a board member. Our most important job as the public funder is to help the public understand the richness of our community's culture and find meaningful ways to support it. If we do our job well, the generations that follow us will internalize this need for public support of all things culture and ensure that it continues. I'd like to wrap up with one last story. When I was introduced to the Rainey Institute last spring, and for those of you who don't know it, it is located on East 55th Street here in Cleveland, comes out of the settlement house tradition. I had a chance to meet a young girl named Taylor, who is 12 years old. I now know that her life is full of hardship. She faces challenges no 12-year-old should have to face. But I never would have known that from talking to her. She very animatedly talked to me about the activities she participates in at Rainey, including Brazilian dance and voice lessons and doing homework after school. But what I remember most from our interaction was her clear assertion that not only was she going to college, she was going to Juilliard or Harvard. She imagined a bright future for herself, despite circumstances to us that might seem supremely daunting. Let's take a lesson from Taylor. Let's dare to imagine a bright future for this region. And working together, I know that our arts, our culture, can inspire the creativity of our community and provide a light that guides the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for that inspiring and informative talk. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a special program featuring Karen Gahl-Mills, Executive Director for Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. We will return to Karen in a minute for the traditional City Club questions and answers. Please formulate questions for our speaker now, and please keep them brief and to the point. Members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we hope everyone listening will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC, and our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. On Friday, April 1, the City Club welcomes Ambassador Nancy Brinker, founder and CEO of the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure. On Wednesday, April 6, the City Club will host Cuyahoga County Executive Ed Fitzgerald at the Cleveland Marriott downtown. If you wish to make reservations for these programs or order a DVD or CD of today's program, please call the City Club at 888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. We are pleased today to welcome guests at tables hosted by Burgess & Burgess, Cleveland Public Art, the Cleveland Orchestra, Community Partnership for Arts and Culture, the Museum of Contemporary Art, and University Circle, Inc. Thank you all for joining us today. Now we return to Karen for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Please wait to ask your question until the microphone holder is standing next to you. Holding the microphones today are City Club Marketing and Membership Manager, Heather Sikora, over here, and Development Assistant Lucille Barbati. Now our first question, please.
Hi. Thank you for those great remarks. My question is, well, first of all, it was wonderful to hear how the CAC is using the arts as a driver for economic development. And as you know, arts organizations need operating funds, and that's what you're focused on, but they also need capital funds. They need, buildings to rehearse in and perform in, especially a new building possibly. I was wondering what CAC's role is in capital funding and what recommendations you have for those organizations who need capital funding in this time of shrinking public funds and endowments that are not what they used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. We've not played a role with capital funding to this point. We've really wanted to concentrate on that general operating support that is so critical to everyone, to getting at a breadth of organizations through our project support funding. And I think that's probably where we will stay. If we can do that, it frees up space for some of our other partners in the community to help pick up some of the capital needs questions. But I would say it's probably time for us to take a good look at what's going on in the community here and try to understand, if it's not at a large level, if there's a role for us to play with capital funding at a small level. So it's a bit of a non-answer, but I think it's something we should consider exploring. How's that?
I think we can all agree in this room that one of Cleveland and the county's great challenges is to connect the dots, all the many wonderful dots that we have in our region. With that in mind, I have two questions. The first is, what are you doing to encourage more partnerships among the arts institutions? And two, what are you doing to encourage greater involvement by the arts institutions in the larger initiatives, such as the Mayor's Sustainability 2019 initiative?
That's a great question, Charles. And I think that we talk a lot as a team, both on our board and on our staff, because we have folks who have spent time in their careers, both board members and staff members, outside of the art space. And sometimes we in the arts talk to each other and don't always talk to everyone else. And so that's better here in Cleveland, I think, than it used to be. I think there's a lot more support of, for example, the Health and Human Services levy and some other things that are happening here than maybe was in the past. But it's the question. The question is, if we're talking about culture, which is lots of stuff. It's not just the great museum or the great gallery on your block, but it's all the pieces that comprise that. How do we provide incentives for organizations to work together better and think more clearly about the collective impact that we can all have? Right now, we don't provide incentives for people to work together. It's certainly something we look at. It's something that our panelists absolutely look at when they review grant applications, because they want to see that arts organizations, if they're really truly connected to the community, are probably also connected to other organizations in town. So it's very much the question, and I would love to get everybody in this room thinking about, if this is about culture and culture is about neighborhoods, how do we find ways to connect the dots better?
Karen, great presentation and great numbers. I wanted to ask you, notwithstanding the fact that you're still in an early stage as an organization and you have a board and you have appointing authority to that board, has there been discussion about broadening the wings out to Northeast Ohio and taking stock of what's happening in Lorain County, Summit County, Lake and beyond, and to talk a little bit about a regional arts culture initiative, or maybe it exists and you could tell us more about it?
You know, I was at a meeting earlier today, actually, hosted by our friends at CPAC, where we are talking about advocacy strategy as we go forward from here and leading up to the end of this 10-year levy, which ends, of course, in 2016. As a political subdivision of the state, we don't take the lead role in any of those kinds of things, so I'm going to be very careful with my words, but I will say CPAC in this lead role has challenged all of us to think about not only the strategies and the tactics that we need to take on to make sure our community leaders understand all that stuff I just said and why it matters to this community, but also begin to think about how do we broaden the support for the arts as we move forward. Is that a regional strategy? Is that, it just depends on what it looks like. We need to think about it together. I'm very pleased that CPAC is taking that role with us and for us. And I guess my answer to your question, Chris, is watch this space. It's something that we must look at.
Good afternoon. My name is Marnie Sweet, and I am from Akron and new to the region. I'm a board member of the English-Speaking Union, and I was very interested in your description of culture as not just being museums or the performing arts, and wondered if an organization like the English-Speaking Union, which is a 50c3, might be included in your definition with the wonderful programs that we have in combination with the Hermit Club, and I hope to come to your board meeting on Monday.
Great, we got a convert. Excellent. So the Ohio Revised Code very clearly defines what we are allowed to fund: arts and cultural heritage, including arts organizations and nature and science. That said, we are finding that through our project support program, we can get at arts activity that is happening in places like an English-speaking union. I don't know your organization, so I can't speak specifically to whether or not you would be eligible. But for example, senior centers for one, some other healthcare institutions that run quality arts program, not crafts, but arts programs that include artists who are running them and adjudicating them, they are eligible to participate in our project support program. Those guidelines are going to be what we talk about on Monday at 4 o'clock, so I'm very glad that you're coming, and I encourage everyone in this room to think about the arts resources in your neighborhood that may not be traditional and encourage them to apply. The applications to project support don't change the amount of money that goes to general operating support agencies. So don't feel like we're reaching out of one bucket and into another if you work for one of the organizations that gets general operating support.
Hi, thank you very much for speaking here today. You threw out some wonderful, inspiring numbers about the efficacy of the funds you provide vis-a-vis how many jobs, both contract and salary jobs, are provided. It's seemed to me that these days you hear a lot about, in both regional and in broader government circles, about dollars going to provide jobs. It's always been something that I've thought that the best money to spend would be towards arts, that it generates more jobs per dollar. Are you getting information that would confirm that, or at least show that that kind of investment is better than, say, maybe sports arenas or things of that nature, that my own personal bias, but are you getting figures that show how effective those dollars are in providing real jobs in the area?
I think the best answer to that question is that we're just starting to tally even jobs numbers directly. There's been a trend in the arts to talk about economic impact And I say that in air quotes because there are a lot of sins that come underneath that title. Sometimes it's real and it's based on real data, and sometimes it's just a multiplier. And it becomes challenging for the arts to ever cut through the economic impact that has been generated and measured by our friends in the for-profit sector. So what we like to talk about is economic activity and employment activity. We think that that's an important way to challenge that metric. And as we measure the number of folks who continue to be employed in the sector here, and it's why we ask the organizations that we fund for this information, because we need to be able to make the case that this is just as important as an employer as our friends on the for-profit side. Oftentimes, in the community that I recently came from, we, after adding it up, realized there had been more attendance at arts or events in our community than at college sports in our community. And we were very surprised by that. I think the other piece in your question is finding ways for the arts to compare ourselves to the other nonprofits and to the for-profit sector so we can give people context. 5,000 jobs is a lot of jobs. What would we do to get a company to move here and bring 5,000 jobs with them? We would do a lot. So what do we need to do to sustain the 5,000 jobs that are here? That becomes a very interesting talking point, and keep watching us for more data about that as we move forward.
Hi, I'm here because of your dad. He's a great fan of yours, and now I understand why. I'm standing here, though, to ask you one question, which certainly is evident in the way in which you're financed, which is by people who, through their generous purchase of cigarettes, are able to provide the resources you have to give away. I think that suggests also that there is a need for generosity in the community on the part of a great many people. And I wonder what your organization will do in the future to encourage that in the institutions that you have the resources to support. What is your strategy for philanthropy, in other words?
With apologies to my dad, sin works here in Cuyahoga County. When the work was done to figure out what was the right mechanism for dedicated public funding, this percentage of this sin tax, which Cleveland has used sin taxes for years to fund important civic institutions, it was clear that this was going to be enough money to really have an impact and to be a source that would be sustainable and have a relatively inelastic demand over time. One of the things we do take into account, however, is that you may not be necessarily looking at an entire population of art supporters who happen to be the ones paying the tax. All the more reason that we need to make sure that the programming that we fund reaches everybody in this community, so that whether or not you would consider yourself an arts person, you still think it's important that this is here. I think, to answer your question, the best thing that we can do is to continue in forums like this to celebrate the work of volunteers and board members and donors around our community and keep talking about the public-private partnership. That's driven Cleveland and the region for years and years and years, and it has certainly driven the arts community. For the last couple of years, when we've had a few more resources, we've been happy that those have been present to lean into foundations who've lost money in their endowments. But it's important that all of us together, the foundation community, the corporate community, and individuals at every level, fund things that we think the community needs and are important. As a former executive director, I'm sort of a fundraiser by nature, though I don't do that in my work anymore. And I think the message is, if you care about it, get involved one way or another. A donation at any level matters, and that's the other thing we have to help people understand. Philanthropy isn't for someone else. Philanthropy isn't for our friends in the Rockefeller family. Philanthropy is saying, I have $25 today and I'm going to invest it at the food bank because I think they're doing a good job. Or I have $100 today and I'm going to invest it in city music because I like their mission. We need to help people understand that giving, even at small amounts, really, really matters, and that is what our community has to do to pull things together.
Hi. When many of the people here in this room were working on the campaigns that resulted in that funding, the premise was, and the talk was all about, this is going to be additive, this is going to create new money and kick the arts up to a whole new level. You touched on it a little bit, but how can you talk about that question and whether There's been sustained funding through corporate support and individual support and things along those lines, and that this public funding hasn't been an excuse for corporate backsliding in their commitment to the arts.
Well, we all know what happened in 2008 and 2009, right? I mean, I think that at 2006, when the tax was passed, there were great hopes that this would be additive money, much as we're talking about with what's going on with the casino. This is going to be that sparky money that helps organizations try new things and move their agendas forward. And we know, clearly, we understand, it's being used to pay the rent and to pay the utility bills and pay salaries. It's operating support. That's what it's for. We get that. I think that we have a strong partnership with the other funders in our community, and we are building a strong partnership with the corporate funders in our community. And I think everybody understands this point about public-private that is so important. I can't tell you if corporations have backslid since 2008. Those in the room who run organizations could tell you that. I can tell you that we've got to find ways to make sure that doesn't continue to happen because our tax dollars get smaller over time, right? It's a good thing that making something more expensive makes people do less of it, which means the tax revenue from cigarette taxes gets smaller. This year it'll be $16.5 million. It was almost $20 million when we started. It'll be closer to $10 to $12 million by the end of the levy. Clearly, we can't do it alone. Clearly, we have to have partners. And the appeal I would make to any of you, especially those of you with boards, help us. And when I say us, I mean CAC, and I mean our friends at the Community Partnership for Arts and Culture. Get in front of your boards and tell this story. I think we have compelling statistics. I think we have some good things to share with them. But we can make the appeal to them to get involved, probably in ways that you can't if you run an organization. So think of us as a resource that way as well.
Karen, hi. I'm interested in the importance of CAC and its role in advocacy in shaping a narrative that not only addresses the metrics of economics and qualitative metrics, but also of quantitative, but also of qualitative metrics. And your opportunity to touch 61 cultural organizations and to also identify perhaps the ability to measure that it is an inefficient process when you're talking about creativity and innovation and quality, and what we can be doing, what you can be helping us in shaping narratives that also address the qualitative metrics.
That's a great question, Jill. And I think that when I was brought on board, one of the directives that I received from our board was you need to raise our visibility. People need to understand that the tax was passed and what's happened to it. And we've spent a lot of time in my first year gathering data and then starting to talk about demonstrating impact. Now the work shifts to exactly what you're talking about. How do we come up with the right messages to bring into the community? How do we help our organizations shape those messages and tell the story not only to our political officials but to their public? And this is a place where I'm sure that we will do some work with CPAC because they do a lot of capacity building work in the arts community. But to really think clearly about how we cut through and get this message across to everyone. We are fortunate now to have a slightly bigger staff. We have an external affairs person. We're starting to do some work with some folks who know this work better than I do. But it's where we're going to need your help and advice, too. And so the other thing I'd say in answer to your question is tell us what you need. Tell us how we can help. Tell us that place where you're in somebody's office and you realize, I really need to know X and I don't. Or, boy, I could really use a cleaner way to say this. And that will help us begin to shape what we feed back to you.
This question is coming from behind you. I think of CAC, as I hear your description of it, as somewhat analogous to United Way, as a fundraiser umbrella organization for social service agencies. First of all, are contributions, can they be made to CAC directly, and are they as tax deductible as United Way? And the second more serious part of the question is, do you see public fundraising as part of your future?
I wish that I could take your contributions. I cannot. We are a political subdivision of the state, which means that we don't have a mechanism for accepting revenue other than that which comes to us from the Ohio Department of Taxation. And that's a good thing because it means we're not competing with the organizations that we fund when it comes to fundraising. So I think that's a fine structure for what we do. Analogous to United Way is that we have the umbrella of what's going on, but very different from United Way. We are not taking funding from organizations or doing fundraising for them. So is there a public fundraising role? That's actually a question I've not thought about, Don. So you've got the stump the band question here toward the end. I think our best role right now is advocacy, is really telling this story to as many people as who will listen, and to make sure that our public officials understand why this is important, particularly at the county level. We have a whole new government. We have a new county executive, we have a new county council. We need to help them understand why this is important to all of us, to all of you, to each council person, help them understand what's going on with the arts and how this money helps. What that leads us to, and the strategies that may lead us to as we go down the road here, could involve an element like that. I think it's too soon to say.
My question is, what is the plan for after the 10 years is up? So what's the future? I mean, it's going to be here before we know it, and just kind of curious what the future holds for the organization.
It is going to be here sooner than we know it, and we are eagerly signing up people to help us think about this right now. As I mentioned, I was at a meeting at CPAC this morning where we were talking about advocacy strategy, and we are talking about a joint task force between our two agencies, with CPAC in the lead as the advocacy organization for our community, to bring people together to talk about what we'll do for the next couple of years when the advocacy work is more about raising awareness. It's about educating us on what it means to be good advocates, and there will likely be some element of training that goes with that. And then it shifts when we get closer to the end of the levy in 2016 to a direct campaign for seeing that it gets renewed. I wear two hats on this question. Part of me wears a hat that says, assume that the levy is going to get renewed, keep moving and keep doing everything you can to make sure that people are aware of why this is important to this community. The other hat that I wear is, assume that we only live for 10 years. What's the impact that we want to make sure we have in case we're not still here? What do we want to have done with this $100 million over the course of a 10-year life? I would submit to you that if we just distribute $100 million without strengthening the sector, we haven't done our job. And so we think about that a lot. But to get involved now is exactly what we need. Talk to my friend Tom sitting down here in front about the task force and how this is starting to come together.
Thank you, Karen. Cheryl Hoffman, Cleveland Museum of Natural History and proud member of CPAC Board. Thank you, everyone who's here today to support Karen and the work that CAC does. I'd like to suggest that in heightening awareness for all the accomplishments and for the future of this wonderful institution and means of funding, that we take you in front of the GCP morning conversation, get in front of the corporate community so that they really understand the significance of what's been happening the past few years. Thank you.
Delighted. Just let me know when. Anything else?
Thank you again, Karen. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a special program featuring Karen Gahl-Mills, Executive Director for Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And as I adjourn the forum, I'm going to hit the gong twice because I forgot to do it at the beginning of the program. We are adjourned. There.